You are listening to the SDSU podcast presented by the East Village Times with your hosts Andre Hagberdian and Paul Garrison. Welcome, listeners, to the SDSU podcast live edition. I'm your host, Andre Hagberdian, joined by Paul Garrison. What's going on, Paul?
What's going on, Andre? Nice Sunday. Great way to be able to end the weekend and some great San Diego State coverage.
Yeah, I believe this is our third live episode, but first one in about 11 months. We did two early last year, one during right after the scrimmage, the opening of Snapdragon Stadium, and then one after the Arizona game. And I think we were hoping to do more, and just timing-wise and schedule-wise made them difficult. But I think this was a good opportunity, per your suggestion, to put a 2 days of fall practice status report together and do this live and have maybe some interaction from Aztec fans who have some questions for us.
I think it's a great idea. Why don't we get going on some of those questions that we had? We asked ahead of time what was some things that people would like us to focus around. Eric Butler, good to see you. Let's go. But do you have any questions? Drop them into the chat on the YouTube, and we'll be able to bring up onto the show. Magic Zulu, Eric Butler Senior. That's a good point. Good point. Got to make sure it's mentioned as senior. But any questions that you have, any things you want to talk about, bring it up, and we'll try to get some answers from what we saw. And then, of course, we're gonna dive into all of the conversations that we had with the coordinators, right? Because I think probably more than anything else, what the coordinator said kind of governed the two practices and everything that we saw. So what's the first question, Andre?
One of the first questions we got was, what kind of offense is this going to be? Is this a run-first offense? And if the answer is yes, is it based on the personnel, or is that Ryan Lindley's philosophy? Do you want to take a first stab at that?
Sure. I think it's absolutely right now because of the personnel, and I think it's his philosophy. I think that San Diego State can become measurably better than they were a season ago if they can get the running game going again. And it's one thing to have a dominant ground game and then try to see how you can become more balanced, but you don't want to become more balanced by not doing either of them very well. And for too much of the year last year, that was exactly the case. They weren't able to run the ball, and they had trouble passing the ball, or when they were able to pass the ball, that did not open up lanes in the run game. And then with the turnover issues, it just stymied their offense. So I think they are absolutely wanting to get back to the run. I think in Coach Lindley's offensive philosophy, he wants to be able to dictate personnel. And if you're going to dictate personnel, then you have to be strong. And so I think he's going to want the opposition to decide what they're going to do. Are they going to match up with size and try to stop the run? Well, then that means you could motion, you could split out one of your tight ends who can run, and now you got a guy that maybe is not quite as good at covering that person. Or if you want to bring everybody inside, you have a quarterback who can run and get outside, and that's harder for people who are bigger to be able to counter. So I think it's a little bit of both, but he absolutely, I think, wants to get back to establishing the run and getting back to that San Diego State identity.
Yeah, we keep hearing that we're going to do what our strengths are. And the coaches, both Coach Hoke, Coach Lindley, keep talking about their running backs and their tight ends. And that predecessor, that basically says that you're going to be a run-first offense and a lot of play action and things like that. I think based on some of the things that have happened on the wide receiver room over the last couple of days, heighten that even more. Mm-hmm. Because you have Jaleel Tucker. We don't know what's going to happen there. We haven't heard any official thing, but it doesn't look like he's going to be on the roster. That was a a scholarship wide receiver. They were already thin with only 8 wide receivers on scholarship, 6 walk-ons. Raphael Williams, as you reported after practice yesterday, his eligibility is up for, debate or question, I guess, waiting for a hardship waiver. So if both of those guys aren't there, then suddenly you're dealing with, 12 receivers, 6 scholarships. That's asking a lot of your wide receivers, a lot of young guys, a lot of inexperienced guys that have not necessarily had the production outside of Mekhi Shaw. And so that even more emphasis is going to be put on getting the running game going, throwing to the tight ends, throwing to the running backs. And a lot of that is play action, a lot of short stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a run-first offense. That doesn't mean that next year or the year after, if they get some playmakers as wide receivers, or if some emerge this year, that Coach Lindley's not going to be more of a pass-first offense in the future. But right now, I think it's going to be run-first.
Mm-hmm. And I think that also fits with what Jalen Mayden does best. I think, it also helps when you're able to run the ball. It helps you to block better. I mean, there's just everything that you could have about it. So I think they're going to try to, I think the key is going to be having, getting rid of the ball quickly. Exactly right. Trying to move it to where he's not holding the ball too long, allowing him to be creative if he gets outside of the pocket. But I think the key, as in all West Coast offenses, and that idea and that short passing game, slants, crossing across the field, is you also at times you have to be able to get vertical, and you want to make sure that like those safeties can't creep and get into those passing lanes because they're afraid of what you're going to be able to do over the top. And we saw on Friday that's exactly what Mayden has been working on this offseason is those kind of deeper routes. And it's just to keep him honest. And I think that they're expecting the trend to continue, that they're going to have outside on the outside, they're going to have they're going to have man-to-man coverage, and they're going to try to put their wide receivers in people that they split out in that position to try to go and make plays and kind of stretch the field, which then could open up the things underneath and just at least make them play honest. I think that another question we had, Andre, if you want to jump on this one, sticking with the offense, everyone's got questions on offensive line. What did you see from the offensive line in day one? And if you can, remember back that far, I mean, how do you think it looked in comparison to the line last year?
I think as an overall reflection from day one of fall camp 2023 versus 2022, it was a lot crisper, less sloppy now than it was last year. It was a marked difference in terms of how they were getting into their plays, how, snaps were good. Not a lot of fumbles, not a lot of broken plays, things like that. I think the offensive line is a big part of that. Now, I think, Ross Ulugali-Masuli would have been playing center, or at least through early part of camp. I think he's looking good there. In my offense preview, I put projected starters, Miles Murrow at center, Ross at right guard, mainly based on what Coach Hook said at the Wednesday press conference, because I asked him about starting center and he went Miles. He mentioned Miles first, but he also mentioned Ross could play there too, and they like him there. But maybe I have to flip-flop that and have Ross center, Miles right guard. I know Dean Abdullah has been getting reps at right guard as well. But I liked what I saw on day one. I was not at day two. I know you were at both days, but I really liked what I saw from first day of camp compared to what I've seen in the prior 2 years of camp. I really liked what I saw from Miles. His first day with the program was good. He had good individual reps, one-on-one versus D lineman, and he had good, 7-on-7 reps. Christian Jones and Drew Azzopardi, they were kind of doing the left-right tackle, very similar to what we saw at spring camp. We we made a big deal about it in spring camp. Oh, looks like BCD is not going to be a starter. And then he ended up as a starter on the depth chart. Well, it's almost the same thing now. And I think now we're not paying as much attention to who's really getting first reps this early in camp. Maybe we'll pay more attention to it, third or fourth week. But I liked what I saw. There's a lot of promise there. And one thing I'll say is last year, they had 7 guys the coaches had faith in playing in games from the offensive line. Right? They had the 5 starters, and then they had Mirabella and Abdullah that also started at right guard. I think this year there's a little bit more depth there, where there's probably 9 or 10 guys that I think the coaches would feel comfortable playing or starting. Now it's just a matter of finding the right 5 and keeping them healthy and keeping them become a cohesive unit. What do you think?
No, I think it's a good point. And I would say the hard part with this whole conversation is, you never know, is it the offensive line has gotten better or the defensive line isn't as good? And so a year ago, they didn't play as well in the one-on-one drills against Keyshawn Banks. They didn't play against Jonah Tavai quite as well, against Justice Tavai. And so sometimes it's hard to know, but just not being able to evaluate the defensive linemen that way, I would agree with everything that you just said. I think that they looked deeper, they looked more confident, they looked more physical. And, overall, I think that if they didn't have, the offensive line didn't have the year that it had a year ago, and you were just basing it off of like the physical attributes and their technique and where they're at, they wouldn't be as big of a question mark, I think, after the first 2 days. I think BCD is absolutely a question mark. I thought that, one of the things that really was interesting to me about the 2 days is it's remarkable the patience that the coaches have. If it were me, I'd be like, okay, like we had this depth chart and we only got a little bit of time for Ohio. So we're going to come into camp and we're not going to play people according to their rank like they had in spring because you had the whole summer and whatever. And I'd be ready to like move on. But the coaching staff did not. I mean, they got reps according to the depth chart by and large with what came out during the spring. And that patience to be able to, remember that they formed that depth chart because of how they performed in the spring. And there was a reason for that. But, as I wrote in the article that came out today, there were reps that BCD lost. And there were times where he did not look like the guy who had started 2 years in a row. And they need, and the guy that they need him to be, Coach mentioned him as somebody who just needs to go to the next level. And I think to your point, Cade Bennett looked like a stud. I mean, he looked like somebody who moved whoever he was up against. And that's who they need BCD to be, especially considering this is his 3rd year. Got a question here from Tom Bankhead.
What's up, Tom?
Tom, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
What true freshman do you see contributing this season? Actually, my answer is it's a good timing because I think we just talked about the wide receivers and maybe the lack of quality or depth there. And I would say, health permitting, Balin Brooks, wide receiver from Pasadena High School. He obviously wide receiver. If there's one position on this team where a true freshman could come in and play and get opportunities, it's probably wide receiver. And from the first maybe 20, 30 minutes of practice on Friday, he looked the part. He's got a body, he's got size, he runs crisp routes, caught a lot of passes, caught almost every pass his way. Unfortunately, he sustained an injury, and we don't know exactly, but it looked like a leg injury, maybe a tweak, and it sat out. So we didn't see him in 7-on-7 or 11-on-11 drills, and he didn't practice yesterday either. But he's a guy, as long as this injury isn't too serious, and he'll be back out there soon. He's a guy I totally see moving up the depth chart and getting serious snaps come when the season starts.
I think it's a good call. Brady Nasser would be my answer. And whatever way you want to look at this, Rocky Long used to say that if you have an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman who is starting, it's because you haven't developed guys. And, maybe in some regards, the super seniors who have been on the line maybe have prevented some of that development. I don't know. But Brady Nasser was somebody that I asked Coach about on Friday. And he said, hey, we really like him. We really would like him to, we really are glad that he came to San Diego State is what he said. And then he was taking first team reps in 11-on-11 drills. And, it went exactly like a guy who's in his second college practice. So he lines up, they run some motion, and the strong side of the offense flips. So Cooper McDonald runs over to the other side, and he needs Brady Nasir to slide inside a little bit to be able to do his, and he's not moving. Nasir's not moving. And so Cooper kind of hits him a little bit, like slide down. He's not moving. So he puts both hands on his shoulder pads, and he's like forcing him to go inside. So he got the point and he moved all before the snap. It was a veteran move, savvy move, got him set up like you want a leader to do. And then they started the play, and Nasir got a sack. So it just showed, I think, the reason why he was taking like such important reps potentially, and also the learning curve that still needs to be there. But I mean, just from that, just from seeing what he was able to do, and he actually got in there, and you saw him, and it's kind of funny, whether it's by design or happenstance, not all of the freshmen have like nice jerseys with like the Aztec numbers on them. So they're the same. They're the right. Well, I didn't even say that. I was going to say they're the right colors, but like Javance Johnson, the quarterback, his is not green. All the other QBs are green, and he's in a black jersey, and
was it black yesterday too?
Yeah, Saturday as well. And we were joking, like, what does he got to do to get a green jersey, And then like, so Brady Nasir's jersey, 48, I believe, it's like just a normal, like almost like a high school looking practice jersey, as generic of the numbers as they can be. And so he just stood out. He just stood out as somebody like, okay, he doesn't belong, but you just kept making plays. I mean, he just kept you just would watch it and you were like, oh, okay, he was in again. He was in again. So he would be the person, although, it's always with the caveat that young guys in the trenches, that's not usually the way that it goes, but that was his goal. He told us when we spoke to him before signing day in December.
I definitely, Brady peaked in, individual one-on-one drills versus offensive linemen on Friday. The other guy on defense that I would say is Marcus Radcliffe. You almost forget he's a true freshman because he was here in the spring as an early enrollee, but he is still a true freshman. And with Patrick McMorris's departure and, not really sure what they're going to do with Kyron White, Max Garrison and Marcus Radcliffe are fighting for that Aztec spot. And Marcus Radcliffe has the size. He's tall, length, to be really disruptive back there in the secondary. So I think that competition for Aztec is going to be really, really good. And whoever wins that is going to be a really good player. And I think Marcus has a chance to win that spot. So he could be another true freshman that could start. I don't think they had a true freshman start on defense last year, but 2 years ago they had Noah Avinger and CJ Baskerville start. So, there's a few guys that could potentially fill that role this year.
Absolutely. And I think one of the parts with Baskerville is he didn't start right away. It took a little bit of time, whereas Radcliffe is there. And the comparison, I think, that you could think of at this young part of their careers is, Baskerville had all of the physical tools. And I think it's like it was sort of like, when are you going to unleash them fully? And I think Radcliffe at this point is already like a little bit more of a more physical version of Baskerville at this point in their career. Starlance 185. I like this, and I, this is why these live shows are great. Be super clear about this. I don't think this is going back to the Rashad Penny, Donnell Pumphrey days where they're 60-40 and they're gonna try to just trick people with the pass, almost like Air Force does. I think that they're absolutely going to look for more balance, but there's two ways to get to balance. Some teams pass in order to set up their run, and other teams run in order to set up their pass. And I think they're going to shade more to that part of it. So I don't think they're going to give up on their receivers, or they don't think the receivers can play. I just think that you're not going to see them have 4 wideouts. You're not going to see them, play more than 3 wideouts at a time. They're going to depend on their tight ends. They believe that their tight ends are mismatches. And they think that they have multiple tight ends. Des Melton is a guy that they added from Louisville, who almost signed with San Diego State out of high school, was very close to signing with the Aztecs. And then when he transferred back, that guy can move. He almost looks more of a wide receiver, even though at Louisville he was a blocking tight end. So that that's the recipe that they want. There was a great play by Logan Tanner in individual drills where it was an underthrown ball, and the defender hit the ball and he laid out and was still able to make the catch. So Star Alliance 185. I don't think that's and any suggestion that they're going to give up on the wide receiver, the passing game. If you listen to Jalen Maiden's comments on Andre on his Twitter account, he really thinks that a lot of people have stepped up and those receivers are ready to go. And, I would say, if we had done this on Friday night, and I would say, who stood out to you in terms of the camp, I would have answered Breon Penny. I thought Breon Penny looked like a stud on Friday, looked really good catching the ball, looked like he was, and then I would also have said Philippe Wesley. He had a touchdown again on yesterday. He had it on Friday. Then he switched numbers, so he's 14 instead of 41. But he good body control, gets open, runs good routes. And then everyone knows what Mekhi Shaw is. And so I don't think they're giving up on the receivers. It's just the question of is their attack going to be ground oriented was the original question. And I think the answer is yes.
How did those receivers look yesterday? Breon Penny specifically.
Yeah. It was the inconsistent part. I mean, he caught everything, but they were bobbles. They weren't just they were sticking to their hands and things like that. And they weren't even in, as opposed to Friday, some of these were just routes they were running. There was no defense at all. And so it was less consistent on Saturday, which has been his bugaboo, right? Where it's like, okay, you have this big game in the spring and then it doesn't translate. I don't think that that's going to necessarily be an option because he's going to need to play. I mean, their numbers are where they're at. I mean, even going and saying that they have 5 scholarship guys that it looks like 6 of them maybe that they're going with. You have a true freshman, 2 true freshmen, and you have a converted cornerback, and so it's they're going to need him to play and they're going to need him to perform, and hopefully it's the year that Breon breaks out and lives up to even a fraction of the expectation that everyone has had since he signed as an Aztec.
Two more questions about the offense that we got offline. One was regarding whether Coach Lindley would be calling plays from the coach's box upstairs or on the field. We haven't specifically asked him that question.
I think we just assumed.
Yeah, based on the fact he was on the field last year with the quarterbacks, I remember him saying he liked being able to talk to the quarterbacks face-to-face in person. I'm going to assume that he's going to be on the field calling plays like Jeff Horton was and not like Jeff Hecklinski, who was up in the booth calling plays. That's an assumption, but I think that's a safe assumption just based on what we've seen from him as a quarterback's coach.
Yeah, and I will say absolutely a swing and miss from us. I mean, we had we had an interview where it could have, he was very gracious with his time. We could have asked him anything, and that should have been in there. That should have been in there. It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. The other question I saw posed was how the young buck, as Coach Lindley called him, Javance Johnson, has been looking so far. Just from what I saw on Friday, he's big, he's strong, he's got a nice arm, he's fluid. He looks the part of a quarterback, and he's obviously getting third or fourth reps, right? Because he's new to the program. But it's going to be an interesting competition with him trying to reach Liu and Kyle Crum parts and try to take reps maybe up there as the season moves on. Because he's a talented guy, and there's a reason why they got him and they didn't recruit any more quarterbacks, because I think they have belief in him. And Coach Lindley talked about that when we spoke to him in March. So he looked good. Anything from you that you saw from him either on Friday or yesterday?
I think you saw a little bit of what you saw on tape, which is I think that he is an advanced thrower at this point. And the accuracy, I think, stood out as far as, there's a defender and I'm going to deliver the ball away from the defender and things like that. But I think at the same time, I think it was pretty clear that he was the fourth quarterback, and at least, and I think that, in his live reps, as many young quarterbacks do, he ended up scrambling, and just tucking the ball and running. But big arm, accurate arm, tall. And, I think that going into the idea of having, 2024 in mind, that's going to be one crazy quarterback competition. Even if it's just those three, even if it's Crum, Amavai, and Javance Johnson, not to mention if they end up bringing in, a transfer to compete with them. So I thought he looked really good, exciting. I think the with Will Haskell, who announced that he has his AA degree, which is awesome, and that he is going to be going to the University of Washington. I think that his arm strength was something that always got everyone really excited. And Javance, is not completely like Haskell in terms of his arm strength. He's closer to that than the other guys that are in the room. And I think that he has a lot of really, really exciting tools. I think you could really see in the way that they competed, the way they talked to them, the way they were coaching him, the other quarterbacks and things like that. It's, again, another really close knit group.
Special teams. Tom asks if Jack Browning is going to handle all three kicking duties like he did last year. I think the answer to that is yes. He, preseason special teams player of the year, voted on by the media. He said he's confident doing all three. Episode 83 with Coach Deacon, he's confident in him doing all three. So I think going into the season, he will be doing all three. Now, we'll see how that plays out. One of the things Coach Deacon talks about is the muscle atrophy or the muscle soreness that comes from week 8, week 9, doing kicking, punting, kickoffs every day in practice. And so we'll see how he responds. But since he's already done it 1 year, he's already done it in junior college, I believe, at Grossmont. So multiple years. I think Jack will be fine and can handle all three. Now, if something happens, I think there's confidence in Placencia and Ramirez to back him up. But I think the plan is for Browning to do all three.
Yeah, I think it's a good segue into the special teams conversation. Sorry, Eric Butler Sr., we're going to do defense last. But I love the idea of David Delgado leaving after he graduates and getting a full ride to South Alabama. I said UAB in the interview.
I love how Coach Deacon was very courteous in his correction.
Very courteous. It was bad. It's so bad too, because I had looked it up and just your mind sometimes thinks in a bad way. And so I was like, oh, South Alabama, that's UAB. No, it's not. It's a different Alabama. Anyway. So bad job. Although not the worst thing that I did in that conversation. how I called Lisa Garrison, who shares the same last name as me, Lisa Hunter, is just, that was terrible. Anyway, I digress. So I would just say, as far as this is concerned, you know, Jack Browning is a very competitive kid. I think that, you know, he went toe to toe with Matt Ariza. He didn't back down from Ariza at all. And all of the reports were that, you know, he was a great punter, even the year that he sat out. And so I think it would just, you know, injuries, you know, aside, I think he's going to compete to have all three and go against, you know, what Coach Deacon wants to do. I thought it was a great response when I asked him, you know, how is Jack Browning handling success? And he just said he's humble and he's one of the hardest workers on the team, and he just goes for it. But at the same time, he's competing. If Zechariah Ramirez or Gabe Placencia turn out to be better and can demonstrate that enough to kind of supersede the fact that you've seen Browning do it in a game, they'll take it. They absolutely will. And that's the way he was able to build a David Delgado, who then turns out to be really good and gets a full ride somewhere else. But he just happened to be behind, you know, Ariza, and then he's behind Browning. So I think it's pretty good. What did you make about the punt return area for San Diego State? I mean, I think in the article that I wrote about it, Jordan Byrd had a 0.7 punt return per yards per average in conference. Do you think that I'm wrong, and the excitement of Des Malone that Coach Deacon showed about his return is kind of immaterial because they're not really caring about how well they return the ball? So that's going to lead to the security, which is then Mekhi Shaw. What do you make of the fact that, you know, they didn't do a great job returning the ball last year? Is that something they're going to try to fix? Do they want to just, you know, try to block kicks and do all the other stuff that they do, and it's just about getting the ball back to the offense? What do you think about that?
I do remember thinking many times last year when Jordan Byrd just didn't have a chance. That when he caught the ball,
right,
you know, there were guys, defenders, punt coverage guys that were on him, and he tried. So I do remember that, and I think in your article you're like, whether it was the returner or the blocking. I think it was more the blocking. But for a team that does try to block punts and does try to bring pressure up the middle or on the wings, you know, you probably do have one or two less people focused on getting back and blocking. So I think that factors in. As ball security is definitely, as Coach Deke, this is the second time, but we've interviewed him twice on the podcast, right, and he's 2 for 2 for saying that the key is for it to be 1st and 10 Aztecs, which means that they did not fumble the ball. Well, obviously, I think last time he said if they don't score a touchdown on the return, he wants it to be 1st and 10 Aztecs. And so ball security is an emphasis. You don't see a lot of punt returns for touchdowns anymore in football in general, even in college football. And I don't know if it's because of the different rules and.
See, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. There were I should have this pulled up. I believe this is right. I think there were 3 teams in the Mountain West that averaged over 10 yards in conference. So other people were returning. Other people had great returning. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, but then, you know, but to your point, they still scored 3 touchdowns. They had the Boise State where they, you know, he dropped it and Max Garrison went in there and roughed him, but they didn't call it. And then they had the against Arizona where the guy kicked it into the butt of the up man. And then Byrd did return one for a touchdown against Idaho State. So, I mean, that's the whole point. It's like, well, I mean, if you go and you say that the punt unit is going to be responsible for 3 scores this upcoming year, hey, you know, that's a really good year.
And 0 fumbles.
And 0 fumbles, because then, of course, you're talking about like not Ryan Matthews, Jesse Matthews, you know, against Fresno State where Ryan Matthews went. And I think, you get into some of that kind of stuff. So I'll be interested to see how it plays out. I think, as much as anything, I had a great quote about Des Malone and about how excited he was about him. And so you're going to use it, you're going to make sure that got out there. But it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see them go with Mekhi Shaw as that returner.
For ball security reasons, mostly.
For ball security, experience. And, I think that, Mekhi might not be able to have that explosive speed but he makes guys miss. And I think that there is a difference between, fair catching the ball and you're at the 25-yard line and you're fair catching the ball and you get it there versus, and I don't mean statistically. I mean, I'm just talking about like just the way it feels. You get a 12-yard return and you go from the 25. It's, you don't have an unbelievably better field position, but you feel like you did something. You feel like you're moving. And I think having more solid returns, I think, could just help the offense to gain that momentum that they, could be close to breaking one or however that would work. But I just thought that they didn't get enough out of Jordan Byrd in the return game. And I thought kickoff's the same thing. I just think that those are numbers when you have somebody who has shown that kind of consistency, something happened. And I think it's definitely a point of improvement, something that they could be, able to do.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see Keenan Christian return kickoffs.
Yeah.
Because he's got speed. Whether he has the cutback ability that Jordan Byrd had on kickoffs, we'll see. But, I mean, speed-wise, I think he's right up there. Straight line speed specifically. Max Garrison was the second returner next to Jordan Byrd last year. I don't think Coach Deacon mentioned him when he was talking about potential returners, but he's a guy who has experience back there. Cam Davis is another guy that because I think if Keenan Christian ends up being the bell cow, the guy who's getting 20 touches a game, they may have to limit his kickoff returns. And so then you can have a guy like Cam Davis. I forget what some of the other names Coach Deke mentioned, but there's
Sheldon Canley.
Sheldon Canley, right? That's some track guys, right? That have that opportunity to show what they can do.
No, absolutely. And he didn't mention Max Garrison, who obviously halfway through the year got that second spot. And, I think he's in line for that second returner. And the second returner is not the track guy. The second returner is the guy who, and I think the highest praise you could possibly give, especially a true sophomore, is that he's a football player, right? And obviously he's running with the ones at the Aztec position because he is just that. But that second guy, you need him to block, right? You need him to be able to run full speed and find the guy who's going to be in the hole to be kind of that springboard for the runner. So you need a football player. You need, if they squib it, that guy needs to be able to go and get the ball, be there securely. And then he needs to be able to do all of those kind of like non-ball in my hand kind of things. But then he needs to make you pay if you decide to kick it the opposite way to get the ball out of your primary guy. And I think that he showed that potential to do that well. So I would expect Max Garrison, when they're announcing who are deep to return for the Aztecs, they're going to mention one of those track guys. And then I think Max Garrison's also going to be mentioned as one of the two people who are back there returning the ball.
Yep. Star Alliance. Before we move on to defense, she mentions, I recently heard our LT is 6'9". The line should have promising potential. Yeah, that's Christian Jones. As someone that's 6'6", he makes me feel short. But he's got a lot of potential. We had him on the podcast about 2 months ago, I want to say, episode 68. So if you want to learn more about him, most Coach Goff and Brady Hoke recently said he's one of maybe the nicest guy on the team. So if you want to learn more about him, episode 68 is the place to go.
Yeah, I want to see if this will work out. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I got a picture. All right. Hopefully it works out. We see the picture of Christian Jones.
I don't see it.
Well, maybe not. Oh, here we go. What do we got?
Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah. So he's a big guy. He's a big guy. And so this was after Saturday's practice. These were Sadez Barfield, who's there on the left of the screen, and Christian Jones 70. And he just absolutely is a mammoth human being. And I think to Andre's point, yeah, exactly, Robbie. He's a big kid. And he's one of the nicest kids that is on the team. When we had him on the podcast, it was to talk about his community service, because every single time you see San Diego State doing something out in the community, whether it's at the bowl game, whether it's they're cleaning up the community, the campus, he's in the middle of it. And obviously you can't miss him. So there's other people there, but you're just like, oh, nice, there's Christian Jones. And so everybody, the thing from the coaching staff is they don't want him to be nice on the field. And, his goal and his aspiration is to be in the NFL. It's what we talked to him about after Saturday. And it's about using force. It's about being strong. It's about, when you get into somebody, like you really let them know that you were there, and you dominate people. You don't just hold up the point of attack, but you blow it open, because he's big, he's strong, he's worked really hard. I mean, when he got on campus, Andre, maybe you can remember the number, but I think he was in excess of 350.
365.
I mean, that and to go from that to where he looks athletic, he looks like somebody that has really bought into what it means to be an Aztec. And I think absolutely promising potential, I think is putting it mildly, especially the fact that he's a redshirt sophomore, and he looks good. He looks really good at that position. And I think being able to, come into the season and not be on the blind side of the starting quarterback right away. And I think the way that teams are going to be attacking SDSU to try to make Maiden uncomfortable and trying to keep him in the pocket and all that kind of stuff, I think is going to make his job a little bit easier. And I think that, again, if he can find that, whatever the right word is, force, nastiness, aggression, to really, and again, his body is, if he was 365, he hasn't been this size for very long, but to be able to really use his body to create the advantage that should be there. And I think as he matures, I mean, he's only 3 years removed from high school. I think there's a lot of good things to be there. Great point.
Lucky Sutton, hometown hero.
Nobody wants to talk about the defense. Sorry, Eric, if you're still here. He got hurt at the end of Friday's practice, and then on Saturday's practice he was working out on the side. It looked cautious. It didn't look anything overly serious. It just looked like they want to make sure that they have everybody there. I think if you took out the names of Christian Jones and Lucky Sutton, you can almost switch them, but at the running back position, the guy is a specimen. I mean, he is big. He looks like a tight end when you see him out on the field. And then you see him run, and you see him outrun DBs. But he also doesn't seem to, and it's hard in practice, right? When you don't have the contact and you don't have those live reps all the time, but he looks like somebody who hasn't quite figured out how to be his own best friend. He has all the physical gifts that you could possibly have, seemingly, and yet he doesn't utilize them, I think, fully yet. And that's something like learning your body, learning all this stuff. Thank you, Eric. You're being very patient. I think he has that potential to be there, but it also hasn't fully clicked for him. And it's something that we talked about, it's something that we talked about a year ago, where there's nothing abnormal about it either. It's not like he's not doing what he's supposed to. Good. There's the question. There's the question right there. That's the question, Tom. That's the question. Anything on Sutton before we move on to the defense?
No. Before we get to Tom's question, I think just one of the questions we got about the defense was how's the defensive philosophy going to be different this year, if at all?
Mm-hmm.
And we can answer that because we literally asked the defensive coordinator that same question in episode 81, Kurt Maddox. And based on how the strength of the defense is the back end, the corners, the secondary, the safeties, and how they're looking to replace so many guys up front, he said, we could probably play a lot more man free, let our corners play man coverage, and we can rush more guys than just the front three and a Sam linebacker. You can blitz your safeties. You can blitz linebackers. And I think that might be a little bit different than what they've done in the past, where they played a little bit more zone and on the back end. In terms of, because they had Cam Thomas rushing, they had Keyshawn Banks, Justice Tavai, Jonah Tavai, where they didn't have to blitz and they could drop guys back. So I think in terms of how the philosophy might change, at least early on, is a lot more man coverage and a lot more blitzing.
Yeah, and I think adding with that, and maybe not answering Tom's question directly, but I think one of the things that really stood out to me, one of the things I wanted to see. Let me say what I wanted to see between Friday and Saturday. I wanted to see how quickly they graded Friday's practice, and then how did that impact who was playing where. Like if they had, let's say, Kyron White, he was the 4th team Aztec player listed on the depth chart coming out of spring because he got moved back after Pat McMorris. Well, he didn't get reps in practice. He was the 4th guy. He got reps the next day though, and so I wanted to see how that would happen, especially in the secondary, because one of the other things that we asked Coach Maddox is, would he be willing to play more DBs because they have so much depth there? And one of the differences, at least it seemed to me, and it's always hard to make sure that you got it meticulously down, but I thought that JD Coffey, transfer from Texas, McCune, transfer from TCU, on Friday they were taking second team reps, mixed in there with Josh Hunter and Eric Butler. On Saturday, Hunter and Butler were absolutely the second team guys, and Coffey and McEwen were the third team guys. And so I think if you're looking for who is that sixth DB, I think the question is, does one of the corners who's not playing, is that the person who's the 6th, or is another one of your Warrior safeties who is the 6th? If I think a lot of it depends, honestly, I think a lot of it depends on who they decide to have for the Aztec position. I think that different skills could complement it. For instance, if you went Max Garrison, I think that he would complement what Eric Butler does well. And I could see them being paired together. Flip side of it is if you go Marcus Ratcliffe, you might want to go Josh Hunter, because those could complement each other, and you would use them. You would use, in the second scenario, you would use Hunter like you use Garrison, and you would use Butler and Ratcliffe in a similar role. So I think it'll be interesting to see, because then, like I said, they could also go and they could pull off a cornerback, and they could say, okay, we're going to grab a corner, and it's not there at all. And then the wild card, I think, of all of it is, again, going back to who they have for the Aztec, that there's a shot that they could take one of these Warrior safeties and they could make that person the Aztec. I spoke to Cedarius Barfield about that possibility, only because Coach Maddox mentioned it on the podcast. And he said, the guys that are playing there are playing really at a high level. Coaches haven't said much to me, but hey, whatever they ask me to do, they'll ask me to do. So I think it could be really, really interesting to be able to see how that develops. And then especially against some of these spread teams where, you're not really going to be blitzing the quarterback very much, because their 3-step drop, throw, wherever the numbers in, bubble screens, etc., hook routes, and then try to maybe occasionally not do the 3-step throw. Somebody gets lazy and you get a pass over the top. They might match up that way and rush 4, especially because I think, at linebacker, I think that I think Cooper McDonald looks really good. Trey White looks really good. I think you have Cyrus Vaiseu. I think he looks really good. Vaikaho, I think, looks really good. And then I think you got Brady Anderson and Cody Moon. And, I'm not sure how solid that is right now. I think of the linebacker positions, that is the one, as exciting as it is Brady Anderson, going and making 85% on his sacks and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the position that maybe you would say we're better off playing a DB like Eric Butler, like Josh Hunter, like fill in the blank, like Dallas Branch, than playing those guys. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how all of that kind of stuff works out. But to Tom's point, there has definitely been an emphasis on size in the secondary. All of their corners, every one of their corners who are going to be in the rotation, they are going to be they're big. They are so big. It seems like they really emphasize that. And when you see a line, I mean, they look like linebackers. I mean, Eric Butler and then Ratcliffe right next to him, and Des Malone, when they're mixed up with doing special teams.
Remember the story that Maddox told us about Dunnell when he came in for a visit, and Bojay thought he was a defensive lineman.
I thought he was. That's the funniest part.
And then we saw Sam Dunnell on Friday, and we couldn't believe that he was a corner before we figured out what number he was wearing and who he was. And that story made so much more sense after seeing Sam in person. Yeah. He hasn't really been practicing very much. Don't really know what the issue is there on any physical issue, but he's a guy that's probably behind at least 5 corners isn't really going to get a lot of opportunities, but his size definitely long term could be a huge asset for the secondary. One thing I wanted to mention, earlier we're talking about the lack of depth and quality of scholarship players at wide receiver, and then safety is complete flip side. Right? Like you lose Patrick McMorris and CJ Baskerville, right? But you bring in 2 Power 5 safeties from TCU, who's in the national championship game, and Texas. And you have 6 guys you brought in the last 2 freshman classes that all can play. Yeah. Like there's they're like 3 deep at all, 9 guys that can probably play this year. And then on the flip side, wide receiver, you're looking for guys to step in and play. And I wonder, Jordan Napier played wide receiver in high school. He's a freshman safety. Dunnell played wide receiver. I wonder if there's a potential, if Raphael Williams' waiver doesn't go through, and Jaleel Tucker is definitely not coming in anymore, which seems to be the case, that some of these guys might move to wide receiver, at least for now, to see what they can do there.
I think that would make a lot of sense. I will say, because we didn't talk about him there, that they have a walk-on who is probably like the funnest wide receiver to watch in practice, Mikey Welsh. He catches everything. His hands are just like they're Jesse Matthews-esque, where there was a pass, an example. He was running kind of a deep flag route, and I think he was expecting the ball to be over the top, and it was thrown more to the sideline, and he looked back, got the ball, and just kind of stuck out a wing, and it just sort of, and he just caught it. It was like, whoa, and how many times have we seen that? And he's somebody who could be that like hand specialist who's catching punts, because his hands are just so good. he was somebody that Coach Deacon mentioned as well. And so I think they have some guys that give them depth that are maybe outside of the scholarship rank. And I think that, part of the evaluation for some of the receivers who are no longer on the roster was basically, it's not the deepest group, and where are you in the pecking order, and so how does that reflect on your future? So I'd be curious to see personally how much a true freshman could switch over and be able to actually impact the depth chart, because I don't think they're going to be using a ton of numbers regardless. And, I think though some of that's going to be like, how serious was Josh Nicholson's injury? He couldn't put any weight on his foot as he was going off the field. How serious is that? If it's not very serious, all of a sudden your numbers don't quite look as bad. I mean, that's your stretch the field kind of a guy that you were hoping for. Don DeMar. Oh, we got to talk about Don. Let's go, Don. Don is this is a good time to talk about this. We at Eastfield Science, man, we're trying to continually get better at our craft, right? And so one of the things that we are planning to do this year, flights are purchased, is to cover the Aztecs on the road, to make sure there's a media presence on every road game. And so that's been scheduled, and Don has stepped up, and he's going to be going as the photographer, I think, for 5 of the 6 games. And it's a pretty amazing thing. But Don said that they had different helmets. And I think that, the helmets, from what I remember, and they are older decals, and they're the same helmets that they've always been using. But they just used like an older logo to just kind of spice it up a little bit. And I think you captured, Don, great pictures of it. I don't think they're switching helmets though, because there hasn't been like, how to say this right. There are some great helmets in college football, but most of the great helmets are just old. And that's why they're great. It's not necessarily like if you just put them person to person, but it's just the legacy and the history and the emotion that comes up with the helmets. Of the new helmets that have been created, I can't imagine that I haven't seen a better one. I mean, they nailed that one. They're not changing. The decal was just, I think, probably to make the practice jerseys look a little bit nicer.
You mentioned 6 road games. Are you predicting a bowl game for the Aztecs this year?
I did say that, didn't I? You're right. Yeah. There's 5 of them. I can't even get all my travel there together. I mean, they've been in a bowl 12 of 13 years. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. No, yes. I do anticipate him being in the bowl game. And who knows, man, with the way that things are there. I think a conference championship, whether it's that Snapdragon on the road, I don't think is out of the question.
Yeah. We will have hopefully a writer and a photographer at all 5 road games. Maybe we'll have more than one writer at a couple games, so we'll see. Hawaii game looks very attractive right now for destination purposes.
Right. All right. So I have a question for you. So one of the ways that the coaching staff evaluates the team is they make their top 10 players, middle 80, bottom 10. Mm-hmm. Skipping the bottom 10 just because, I'm going to go through that. Who are your top 10 players, regardless of position, for the Aztecs, for you after what you saw spring, summer, reputation, what they've done in the past, etc.?
Jack Browning.
Is that 1 or 10, or just 10 in general?
I'm not going to give you an order.
I like. You want me to say that would be pretty impressive.
Okay. I'm not going to rank them, but I'm just special teams. I'll go Jack Browning.
Nice.
Garrett Fountain, Cooper McDonald, Noah Avenger, Barfield. Keenan Christian. Cade Bennett. How many is that?
I'm not counting.
Mark Redmond.
Yeah, Redmond. Jalen Maiden, maybe?
Jalen Maiden, did I not? Yeah, Maiden. And I want to say Ross.
Okay.
I think this is Ross. I think Ross is going to be this is the season based on what we heard from Goff and Coach Hoke has been. Not to say that what coaches say is going to come to fruition, but I think based on some of the things we've heard and seen, I think how serious he's gotten, and based on some of the personal stuff that's happened to him, I'd put him up there. I think that's 10.
That's a solid list. The ones the ones that I would think are probably, like there'd be the question I would have is Cooper McDonald, and Cyrus Vaiseu, I think could take his spot. Des Malone is somebody who it's hard to pick a corner other than him, only because he's the guy who actually started when they had all these competitions, and he's the guy that played the most snaps and that started. And I think that the comments that came from Coach Maddox about I don't know that I want to say he's the guy who's going to step up. Could be a motivation piece.
I was surprised by that answer.
Oh, me too. Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. That was a great answer. As most of what Coach Maddox does is, he does a great job, obviously. But I think that that would be somebody that I would put in there. Definitely agree with Cade Bennett. I think Cade Bennett, could be up in the top 5. I think that he could be pretty special. But I think you have a really good list. Sedarius Barfield, man, I if there was anything that I think was I don't know, surprising is the right word, but just really positive. I think that came out of Coach Maddox, Coach Deacon talked about it as well. Was just how hard he worked this summer. Obviously, he's going to have NFL aspirations next year as he goes into it, but to be able to be the hardest worker, first in all of the drills. I mean, what a gift. And he said the reason that he did it is he wanted to, he understands the idea of legacy, and that the Warrior safeties who preceded him showed him how Warrior safeties act, and that there's a lot of young guys, and he wants to make sure that you talked about the depth, the 9 guys who could play, and that he wanted to be able to do that. So I thought that was pretty positive. And I think they need him to be that leadership role. I think they need him to be that good, because I don't necessarily know, like, at spring, if any of us would have had Barfield as one of the top 10 players, you know what I mean? But it's clear that they're hoping that he becomes that guy who is not just somebody who does his job one week and then, not so much, but it's just that impact guy that they can count on and plan their defense around, and kind of put those inflection points around him, because he's the guy who can do so much and has been there for so long.
And not to say that he would have done things differently if this wasn't the case, but I think with McMorris leaving, put a little bit more onus on him as the senior leader to be able to take it up an even higher notch, because those guys are going to look to him now, not to McMorris anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't.
All right, last group we haven't talked about, defensive line. Robbie Casillas says, I loved listening to Coach Maddox talk about the DT transfer from Oklahoma State. Sammy Tui Halamaka, I believe is his name.
Let's go.
Everyone, all the coaches just call him Sammy, so I think we're gonna roll with Sammy. And how they had to sit him down and how well he responded. That'll be huge if he has success causing havoc in the middle. Absolutely. I mean, he's coming from Oklahoma State. The last transfer from Oklahoma State, Cade Bennett, worked out pretty damn well. So I think Sammy is a big guy. He's a strong guy, powerful. I think he could definitely be the starting defensive tackle by the time the season starts or shortly thereafter. And he could be kind of that big muscle inside, eating up blocks and letting the linebackers kind of trail in behind him with openings to either the running back or the quarterback. So I think he's going to be a big part of that defensive line.
I think they would like him to be, but I think that I was paying attention to where they were ranked, and he was third. He was the third tackle.
Behind Dalton, and who's second?
Alualu, 99.
Oh
yeah. So he 99 was the starter,
yeah,
and then he ran with the ones, and then 97 ran with the twos, and then Sammy ran with the threes, and it was fair. It was fairly consistent. And I one person on the defensive line though that we should mention is Keon Mitchell. We already mentioned Brady Nasser at the beginning when somebody had asked. This is another young guy who has good size. He's young, and asked coach about him only because he kept making plays. You kept hearing his name. Hey, Keon, that was a great play. Hey, Keon, that was a nice play. The coaches, hey, Keon, oh yeah, way to be. And you see him in the backfield, and it goes back to, I think, what coach talked about when he talked about Brady Anderson, and he said, well, he was running with the threes and he was making plays. Let's see how he does with the twos, and then let's see if he makes plays. And so I think he's earned himself the opportunity to do more. And I asked coach about him on Saturday, and he said, we're going to be counting on him to produce. So he seems to be in their plans. And it'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds and how all of that works out. I think there's a big challenge with the defensive line, and the challenge is I don't know how, hopefully somebody in practice steps up so much that it's just clear as day, right? The way Coach Hope described Garrett Fountain is he described him as kind of like, went to the team, you could hear him yelling out, that was a Garrett Fountain rep. That was a Garrett Fountain rep, because he's just the guy who can play. And he's consistent, and he does what they want a defensive lineman to do. And I think if they don't have enough guys who can step up that they feel really good about what their rotation is, they're going to have to figure out a way to let these guys audition during the game, during the hardest stretch of the season. You know what I mean? They're going to have to, I think maybe you could, it could work out pretty good. If you have an audition against Ohio, audition against Idaho State, and you have your rotation set by UCLA, that's an ideal situation. But there was a play, which always happens. It doesn't matter, where it's at, but it was a third team rep. And so it wasn't, anything crazy about, but I mean, there was, Andre, you and I could have gained, and you work out, so maybe that's not a surprise to you. I could have gained 10 yards. I mean, it was just you know what I mean? Like Moses went to the Red Sea with less room than the line, was able to open up against the defensive line in that rep. And he took it. I mean, he went to the house, and the safeties could not come over because it was just the angles were blown because it was just a huge hole, and it was a full head of steam gone down the sidelines. And, for all of the talk of the back end, if these guys can't hold up at the point of attack, and they can't figure this out, it's a long year. I mean, it's just difficult to get it back. And you start doing run blitzes, and you start doing all that stuff. And then you hope that your secondary is as good as it is, and they can just cover people. And I think that's the kind of the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is these guys grow up, and you are allowed to have some of that, cloak and dagger that makes the 3-3-5 so good, because there are so many guys you got to pay attention to, and then you can do zone, and then you can do man, and then you can, confusion and all that stuff can come back to it if your line can be, competent. And so I think there's tons of guys. I mean, I think if I'm saying the overall vantage point, I think years and years and years ago, I was sitting in the stands, Qualcomm Stadium. I was at the Murph and sitting in the end zone. They were playing, I think, I don't know, with UNLV or something. And a recruit was happened to be sitting right in front of me, and the guy came from the field, and he came into the thing, and his buddies were there, and he said, "Well, they're not any bigger than us." That's what he said. He goes, and then the game was about to start. He goes, "Now let's see if the speed of it's way faster." And I was like, "Oh, they're not going to be very good." like that's a problem if a high school guy does not go in there and go like, "What on earth?" San Diego State has impressive size up front, the height at lots of positions. They definitely have the football players that the Jake Feely kind of guys who are undersized but can just play football, and they definitely have a share of those. But they walk off the bus and they look like a Power 5 team. They have size. They're fast. They both practices, even though they were just in shells, were physical. They stayed on their feet, obviously, as much as they could. That was an emphasis from the coaches throughout. But it was they're just really, really good size. I mean, you just see specimens, people that you're just like, oh, okay, like that guy. We mentioned it, Deshaun McEwen, transfer TCU. That dude's his athleticism. You see it. I mean, usually, when they're doing the zigzagging and the backpedaling and the things like that in the warmups, you can see the hips moving a little bit better for the cornerbacks versus the safeties, and very small, subtle things. Not him, man. That guy could get in and out of his breaks. He could do all of that kind of stuff. And he's good size. He has good size, and I think you can look at that throughout the team. And the defensive line, same thing. They got anything that they want to do, they can do. Jalil Jackson, who's a walk-on. He's a short and stout guy who can be at the point of attack and kind of hold things up. They got long athletes. They got long and big athletes. They got, a wide variety of things they do. They got speed guys. You were mentioning Miles Moreau earlier in the podcast. And he got absolutely dusted by Dom Oliver in a rep. And I mean, just Dom Oliver's speed, just like absolutely, he just inside move and bam. It was just like that quarterback would have been hurting if that play had been in a real play. And that suddenness that Oliver has always shown. I mean, it was interesting. And, gosh, Trey White.
Well,
Trey White's
huge. Dom Oliver, he's a guy we talked a lot about last fall camp.
Yeah.
And didn't really get a lot of opportunity because he ended up making a switch to defensive end. Obviously, he was behind way too many guys. But he's now a third-year sophomore. And, this is the opportunity to get on the field, become a starter or a primary backup and produce, because I know he's been as I asked Garrett Fountain, what advice did you give to him? And he said, just eat, put on weight, keep eating. And Dom has gained weight.
Absolutely has.
But with the openings on the defensive line, this is finally his year where the promise and the potential needs to equal production.
I agree. I agree. Although I will say, they were just kind of close enough to see him, and Trey White looks like he should be playing defensive line, and Dom Oliver looks like he should be playing linebacker. And of course, he came in as a linebacker and then switched to D line. And Trey White at Eastlake High, he played defensive line and switched to linebacker. And so I know they're really big on Trey White as well. But again, just a giant human being. I mean, just like a guy who can hold the edge, perfect for that outside Sam linebacker role where, he can handle multiple blockers and all that stuff because he just has great size. But I think that really came across and yes.
Yeah, this will definitely be posted. The replay will be posted, and then we'll put the audio up on the podcast platforms as well. So this will definitely be on there.
I know we want to be wrapping this up, but a couple of things I really wanted to mention. I mentioned in my article, but I just want to mention it again. On Friday, talking to Jalen Maiden, and I'm asking him a question, and I'm trying to get him to talk about himself, which is not an easy thing to do. And and getting him to know what is he thinking, what is he feeling, what's going on with him. And so I asked him about, the respect, because all the players, all the coaches just talk about how excited they are about his season, and he's earned it and it's ready for it. And he had the presence of mind in that moment to single out Arnold Escanio, who I had to go back and listen to it again. And then I had to go through the roster to be like, who did he talk about? Olympian High School, Southwestern College, now at San Diego State, hometown hero guy. And he said, I see that guy working hard. And so I know that everybody sees how hard I worked as well. But I just thought that the presence of mind to be able to think about another human being like that, out of the hundreds of teammates that he has, or 100 teammates that he has, I just thought it just showed, I think, what makes him such a special leader. I think we should spend some time talking about Jalen Maiden. What have you seen from him in practice? And is it fair to say that the season rests on his left arm?
Absolutely. I agree with that. I think we saw so much good from him in the first 6 games of his tenure, 5-1, and the only loss was Fresno. I think we seem to only remember those last 2 games where things just went really wrong. Air Force game, 3 points, multiple turnovers in the red zone. Middle Tennessee, I think they got off to a good start in that game. But, the wheels fell off in the second half. I don't think they scored a point in the second half. And we seem to remember those 2 games more than we remember the first 6. And I think if he can be closer to those first 6 than that last 2, I think the team and the offense can do enough to win games. So I think so much, and obviously it's recency bias. You're going to remember the last time you saw him in a game, and you're going to remember turnovers, and I think you're going to forget the things he did against San Jose State, where he was throwing deep touchdown passes to Tyrell Shavers, New Mexico, connecting with Mekhi Shaw on big plays, rushing for touchdown. I think the Nevada touchdown run was still one of the best quarterback touchdown runs in college football, like last season.
Yeah.
And
special.
So the special things he can do are still going to be there this year. It's, as we talk about, it's limiting the mistakes and not letting it snowball, as Coach Lindley talked about. He's going to need help. The offensive line has to do their job. The running backs need to do their job. Tight ends and receivers need to get open and catch passes. But he's got the talent that he showed that he can lead a very respectable offense that puts up 25 points per game. I think it's doable, and he's got the right mentality to do it. It's just a matter of getting it done. And I think we're going to be talking about it until the games start. But once the games start, I think it's a matter of putting it into motion. I think the coaches have confidence in him because we've seen what really good looks like. He was an all-conference honorable mention off of 7 games, right? The bowl game was the bowl game.
2,000 yards.
Yeah.
2,000 yards. If he's the starter of the entire season, that's a
3,500 yards.
Yeah. That it's something. And going back to one of the first questions about whether or not, they have a run offense. I think it's a run offense to accentuate what he does best, which is to get him into play action, which is to get him rolling, get him moving, get him. And I think that's why they do it. It's not Christian Chapman, where they're running and they hope that Christian Chapman can move them into the right places and make the big plays and convert some third downs, thinking about like Stanford to, that whole entire drive to win the game that Chapman was great at. It's not that. It's you want to run so that the defense has to respect both. And then that opens up so many opportunities for what Maiden is capable of doing. So I definitely don't think you should take from the comment that they're going to run the ball as saying that somehow the ball isn't going to be in Maiden's hands. I think this is Maiden's team. And I think that, I think his ceiling, quite frankly, is I think he can be the offensive player of the year in this conference. And I think it has as much to do. It's going to be about the right balance between ball control and also forcing the ball and being that dynamic playmaker and being able to kind of live with a little bit of both, using his legs more. You asked him about that on Friday, and that's something that he's paying attention to. But I think because of Jalen Maiden and kind of the unknown, right? Because again, if he's honorable mention all conference again, that's not going to be a shock either, right? So it's like that whole ceiling and floor question. I think because of who he is and the fact that, he isn't completely established, but did show so much without a full off season of being at the position. I think this makes San Diego State's ceiling and floor much more volatile than I think it's been in years past. Like I would argue that 2021, I don't think they reached their ceiling. If their ceiling means their peak, I think that COVID kind of took that away. And the things that and off the field stuff as well, rightfully took that away. And I thought last year, I thought that was pretty much their floor. I thought that they that was their floor. This year, if we're looking at that, I sincerely just talking about the regular season. I don't think that there's a team on their schedule that if they play their best and they get some breaks that they can't beat. Like, I don't think that there's an Alabama on their schedule that you're just like, well, like something miraculous has to happen or whatever. I'm not saying they should be favored or whatever, but I think their ceiling is to win all of their games. If we're saying like their true ceiling, but I also think that their floor, if they do turn over the ball, if they don't fix the offensive line, I think their floor is a lot lower as well. And, I think this could be the year that they don't make a bowl if Jalen Maiden can't figure out how to control the ball, can't be the playmaker that he looks to be. And, the defensive line doesn't figure it out, and the other teams are able to run the ball on them, and the things that be what it means to be Aztec football isn't played. But I think that's the fun of this season. I mean, there's no expectations on them, but oftentimes they seem to thrive, when there's less people talking about them, picked fourth in the conference. And that unknown about how good they actually can be, I think in some ways makes this season really fun.
Remind me if you remember this, actually. The 12-2 season, they were picked to finish third in the division, right?
I do not remember that.
I think so. I'm going to go back and look, but I believe the 12-2 season, they were picked to finish third in the division.
Which makes sense coming off of 2020.
Right. And then last year, I think they were picked to between them and Fresno, right? But they were up. They got a lot of votes at least. And then we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. One of the best plays I saw on Friday, and this is a standard play in every playbook, so I'm not giving away any secrets here, is they ran a play action fake run to the right where all the line is moving to the right, and Jalen Maiden bootlegged out to the left, and he had an option to whether he could run, or he had Mark Redmond running a drag coming from the right to the left. And he threw it to Redmond, and it got about 10 yards. But plays like that where he's outside the pocket and gives him the ability to run for a first down or to throw. I don't remember who the receiver was, but there was another receiver that was going deeper. That could be a potential deep play, and then Mark Redmond was the shorter guy, or the nearer guy. So things like that, I think, using Maiden getting out of the pocket, I think we could see a lot of, because I think Cam Rising did a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And if they're going to be like Utah, I think that you'll see a lot of that as well.
Absolutely. And I think that that's how you manufacture big plays. I think that's how that it's not necessarily by the design, but they just kind of figure out, like, somebody moves and now they're wide open outside of maybe the script. So anyway, Andre, this is great. I thought that, when we always get to preview season, I'm always like, there's so much work to get done in so little time. But thank you to the coordinators who allowed us to be able to do that. And I felt like this was a perfect bow to put on all of that. Gio with the videos, Don with all of the photos, you with the articles, me with the articles, just really all of our, James with all of the editing and all the things that we do behind the scenes, man. I was really excited about our, just the kickoff the season and the coverage that we were able to provide. Very proud of it.
Yeah, one last question we missed before we get out of here.
Okay.
Michael asks about Jaleel Tucker. He was not at second practice either. It does not appear that he will be on the team. We don't have anything confirmed that we can report as to a reason, but it does not look like he will be on a team this season. So that's all we got there. It's a disappointment because he was a guy who had a lot of promise, a hometown kid, wide receiver. He's a track guy, an athlete, but things happen that way. Appreciate all of you guys tuning in and listening, asking questions. Appreciate all our listeners, because if we didn't have any listeners, we probably wouldn't be doing this. So we appreciate all of you guys. Thanks, Paul, as always, for everything you've done and going to practice yesterday and your report. Those videos from Gio were really good. Excited about him and the stuff that he does and the stuff that Don and all of our other photographers do. So it's going to be an exciting season. I'm excited to watch actual football games. And I know we didn't talk about conference realignment because we'd rather, save our sanity.
Yeah, football. Let's talk about football.
Yeah, we'd rather talk about football and let all that stuff play out. So any last words, Paul?
No, just again, same thing. I appreciate you. I would say, thank you for listening. Tom, you're going to have to work Andre. The podcast and all that stuff is Andre's baby. So he produces all this stuff. He produces all this stuff when we, get off of here and somebody was asking, is this going to be online? It's Andre who puts it online. It's Andre who, not on the live ones, but on the other ones, if I say something stupid, he makes it sound a little bit better. Almost picked me up when I called Garrison, Lisa Hunter. We couldn't quite figure out a way to not do that in a sloppy way. But he does so much to make all of it happen. So as far as doing that more frequently, Tom, this is your soccer buddy over here.
All right, guys. Thank you. We'll talk to you guys next time.